The sound of human skin sizzling is something you never forget. I had heard it in the jungles of South America and the deserts of the Middle East, usually accompanied by the smell of burning fuel and gunpowder. I never expected to hear it in a quiet, air-conditioned family courtroom in Seattle. I definitely never expected to hear it coming from my wife. But the worst part wasn't the scream that tore out of Amelia's throat. The worst part was the sound that followed it. The deep, rumbling, amused laughter of the man sitting on the high bench. Judge Victor was laughing while my wife's face melted. He thought he was a god. He didn't know he had just woken up a devil. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. 3 hours earlier, I was just Mason, the boring software engineer. That was the role I had played for 7 years. I wore glasses I didn't need. I drove a Volvo. I let people cut in front of me in line at the grocery store. I had buried my past so deep that sometimes even I forgot who I used to be. I forgot about the 13 confirmed kills from a distance of over a mile. I forgot about the Black Ops classification on my service file that technically didn't exist. I did it all for Amelia. She wanted a safe life. She wanted a husband who came home at 5 o'clock and didn't have nightmares. So, I became that man. I became so good at being boring that she eventually got bored of me. We sat at opposite tables. The mahogany wood of the courtroom felt heavy, oppressive. Amelia wouldn't look at me. She was wearing a white dress, something innocent, something designed to make me look like the villain. She looked beautiful, even now. That was the tragedy of it. Even knowing she had been sleeping with another man for 6 months, even knowing she was trying to take the house, the savings, and the dog, part of me still remembered the day we met. Mr. Miller, Judge Victor said, his voice booming through the room. Your silence is irritating. Your wife's lawyer has presented a compelling case. Emotional neglect is a serious accusation. I looked up at Judge Victor. He was a large man, handsome in a jagged, cruel sort of way. He didn't look like a judge. He looked like a politician who knew where the bodies were buried. He had been staring at Amelia throughout the entire hearing, not with professional detachment, but with a hunger, a dark, possessive look that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts, the ones I had suppressed for years, were screaming at me. Target acquired. Hostile intent. I haven't neglected her, Your Honor, I said softly, keeping my voice level. I worked hard to provide for us. I thought we were happy until I found the hotel receipts. Objection, Amelia's lawyer shouted. He was a greasy man named Dominic who smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. Relevance. Sustained, Victor smirked. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. We aren't here to discuss your paranoia, Mr. Miller. We are here to discuss the division of assets. And frankly, I don't see why a woman of Amelia's caliber should be tied to a deadweight anchor like you. I saw Amelia flinch. It was subtle, just a twitch of her shoulder. She looked up at the judge, and for a second, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, fear of him. That was the first crack in the illusion. Why would she be afraid of the judge ruling in her favor? Please, Amelia whispered. Her voice was trembling. Can we just finish this? I just want the divorce. I don't want his money. The courtroom went silent. Dominic, her lawyer, looked shocked. Amelia, that's not what we discussed. I don't care, she snapped, her voice rising to a panic. I just want to leave. Please. Judge Victor's expression shifted. The smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian anger. He stood up, his black robe swirling around him like a storm cloud. Approach the bench, Mrs. Miller, Victor commanded. No, she breathed. I said, approach the bench. His voice cracked like a whip. The bailiff, a heavy-set man who looked more like a bouncer than an officer of the court, stepped toward Amelia. He put a hand on her arm, guiding her, forcing her, toward the judge. I started to stand up. Hey, she said she doesn't want to. Sit down, Mr. Miller, or I will hold you in contempt and have you thrown in a cell so dark you'll forget what the sun looks like. Victor spat at me. I sat, but I shifted my weight to the balls of my feet. My heart rate dropped. My breathing slowed. The world sharpened into high definition. I wasn't the software engineer anymore. I was scanning the room. 2 exits. 1 armed bailiff. 1 court reporter. And the judge. Amelia stood before the high bench, looking small and terrified. "You are ungrateful," Judge Victor said, his voice low, but the courtroom acoustics carried it straight to me. "After everything I promised you, you try to back out now? In my court." "I can't do it, Victor," she sobbed. She used his first name. My blood ran cold. She knew him. This wasn't just a biased judge. This was the affair. The mystery man. It was him. "You don't get to decide what you can do," Victor snarled. He reached under his bench. I thought he was reaching for a gavel. Maybe a document. He pulled out a glass jar. It looked like a mason jar, filled with a clear, thick liquid. "Amelia," he said, his voice mocking now, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you can't see the future I'm offering you, then maybe you shouldn't see anything at all." He unscrewed the lid. "No," I shouted, launching myself out of my chair. I was fast, but I was 20 feet away. Judge Victor threw the contents of the jar with a violent, sweeping motion. The liquid arched through the air, catching the courtroom lights, beautiful and deadly. It hit Amelia square in the face. For 1 second, there was silence. Then, the smell hit me. Acrid, chemical, burning meat. Amelia screamed. It was a sound that scraped against the bone. She fell to her knees, clawing at her eyes, smoke rising from her skin. "My eyes! Oh God! My eyes!" she shrieked, thrashing on the floor. Chaos erupted. The court reporter knocked over her machine. The lawyer, Dominic, scrambled backward, tripping over his own chair to get away from the victim. But Judge Victor didn't scramble. He stood there, towering over her writhing body. And he started to laugh. It was a deep, belly laugh, shaking his shoulders. He looked down at her like she was an insect he had just stepped on. "That's what happens," he yelled over her screams. "That's what happens when you disrespect the law." I reached her. I slid on my knees, grabbing her hands to stop her from rubbing the acid deeper into her eyes. Her skin was red and blistering, peeling away in layers. "Water!" I roared at the bailiff who was standing there, frozen in shock. "Get me water. Now." I looked up at Victor. He was still holding the empty jar. He looked at me, and for a moment, our eyes locked. He expected to see a broken husband. He expected to see panic, tears, fear. He didn't see any of that. He saw a man who had laid in a marsh for 3 days waiting for a warlord to step onto a balcony. He saw a man who knew exactly how to dismantle a human body bone by bone. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I memorized his face. I memorized the vein pulsing in his neck. I memorized the way his left eye twitched slightly when he laughed. I was recording him, not with a camera, but with the predator's instinct I had buried for Amelia's sake. The bailiff finally moved, running out to get water. Sirens wailed in the distance. "She attacked me," Victor shouted suddenly, changing his demeanor instantly as the doors burst open and police flooded in. "She had a weapon. It was self-defense. I knocked a chemical cleaner off the bench in the struggle." Lies. Easy lies. And as the police rushed in, they didn't run to the man holding the jar. They ran to me. "Step away from the victim," an officer screamed, leveling a taser at me. I held my hands up slowly. Amelia was whimpering on the floor, her life destroyed in seconds. I looked at Victor one last time. He smiled at me. A little, arrogant wink. "Laugh while you can," I thought, the cold silence spreading through my mind like ice water. "You just declared war on a ghost." The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, a smell that always reminded me of the military field hospitals in Kandahar. But this was worse. In Kandahar, you knew who the enemy was. Here, the enemy was wearing a robe and sitting in the highest court of the city. I sat in a plastic chair, my hands clasped together, staring at a scuff mark on the linoleum floor. I had been sitting there for 6 hours. The police had questioned me briefly, but their tone made it clear I was a nuisance. Judge Victor's version of events was already becoming the truth. Accidental spill during a violent outburst by the wife. The news was already running with it. Local judge attacked in courtroom. They weren't showing Amelia's burned face. They were showing Victor's stern, heroic profile. A doctor finally emerged through the swinging doors. He looked exhausted, his surgical mask pulled down around his chin. Family of Amelia Miller? I stood up. I'm her husband. The doctor hesitated, looking at my clothes. My shirt was still stained with the chemical residue from holding Amelia. She's stabilized. But the damage is severe, Mr. Miller. The corrosive agent was highly concentrated industrial acid. We've managed to save the tissue around her cheeks and nose with grafts. But her eyes. He shook his head. The corneas were dissolved instantly. She is permanently blind. The words hit me like a physical blow. Blind. Amelia, who loved painting. Amelia, who used to spend hours staring at the sunsets from our porch. Can I see her? I asked, my voice sounding like gravel. She's awake. She's asking for you. But be prepared. She's heavily sedated, and she's in a lot of pain. I walked into the room. It was dim. The machines beeped in a steady, rhythmic cadence. Amelia was a silhouette in the bed, her entire head wrapped in thick white bandages. Only her mouth was visible, her lips cracked and swollen. I pulled a chair close to the bed. I didn't touch her. I didn't know if I could without hurting her. Amelia? I whispered. Her head turned sharply toward my voice. Mason. It was a broken, raspy sound. Mason, are you there? I'm here. She started to cry, her body shaking. I can't see. Why can't I see? The doctors are doing everything they can. I lied. There was no point in crushing her hope yet. You need to rest. He did this, she sobbed. Victor, he did this to me. I know, I said. I saw him. You don't understand, she gasped, her hand reaching out blindly, grasping for my arm. Her grip was weak, desperate. I was pregnant, Mason. It was his. I told him I was going to keep it. I told him I was going to leave you and be with him properly, or I would tell everyone about us. About the bribes. My stomach churned. The betrayal I had felt in the courtroom was nothing compared to this. She hadn't just cheated. She was pregnant with his child. And she had threatened a man who had built his empire on secrets. Bribes? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. He takes money, she whispered, the sedatives pulling her under. From gangs. From corporations. He fixes cases. I found the ledger in his study. I took pictures. That's why. She drifted off, her hand going limp in mine. I sat there for a long time. The anger was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was the feeling of chambering around, the feeling of checking wind speed. I stood up and walked out of the hospital room. I didn't go home. I drove to the precinct. I asked to speak to the lead detective. A man named Grant came out. He was chewing gum, looking bored. He had corrupt written all over him. The expensive watch that a cop's salary couldn't buy, the dismissive sneer. Look, Miller, Grant said, leaning against the counter. The judge says it was an accident. Your wife was hysterical. We found traces of unstable chemicals in her purse. Looks like she brought it in to attack him and it backfired. You found chemicals in her purse? I asked slowly, after the judge threw a jar from his bench. That's not what the witness statements say, Grant said, stepping closer. His breath smelled of tobacco. Witnesses say she lunged. Witnesses say he tried to block it. It's a tragic accident. Go home, Miller, before we decide to charge her with assault on a chaotic officer. He poked a finger into my chest. And you? You're just a computer guy. Don't play detective. You'll get hurt. I looked at his finger. Then I looked at his eyes. I could have broken his finger, his wrist, and his elbow in 3 moves. I could have slammed his throat into the counter and collapsed his windpipe. But that would be sloppy. That would be loud. You're right, I said, stepping back. I made my shoulders slump. I looked at the floor. I'm just upset. I'm sorry. Grant smirked. Yeah, go home, computer guy. I walked out of the station. The rain had started falling, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. I drove home. The house was dark. It felt empty without Amelia, even though our marriage had been dead for months. I walked into the kitchen and poured the dog's water bowl out. I wouldn't be here much longer. I took the dog, a golden retriever named Buster, to the neighbor's house. I told her I had to go out of town for work. Then I went back inside and locked the door. I went to the basement. Most people used their basements for storage or laundry. I had a wall covered in pegboard with tools. Behind that pegboard was a false wall. I placed my hand on the scanner hidden behind a loose brick. A red light scanned my palm print. A green light flashed. Click. The wall swung open. The air inside was cool and dry. It smelled of gun oil. I walked in. On the rack sat my past. A customized Chaytak M200 intervention sniper rifle. A suppressed SIG Sauer P226. Boxes of subsonic ammunition. Flashbangs. Fiber wire. I picked up the rifle. It was heavy, familiar. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend who liked to cause trouble. I stripped off my button-down shirt and my khakis. I put on black tactical pants, a tight thermal shirt, and gloves. I looked at myself in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The software engineer was gone. The boring husband was gone. Mason the Ghost Miller was back. I wasn't going to sue Judge Victor. I wasn't going to argue with Detective Grant. They had the law. They had the media. They had the money. But they didn't have the dark. I owned the dark. I loaded a magazine into the pistol and racked the slide. You took her eyes, I whispered to the empty room. So I'm going to take your peace. Then I'm going to take your reputation. And then I'm going to take everything else. I turned off the lights in the basement. The hunt had begun. The rain in Seattle is perfect for surveillance. It washes away footprints, muffles sound, and makes people keep their heads down. Nobody looks up when it rains. That's why I was comfortable perched on the wet slate roof of the apartment building across from Judge Victor's mansion. I had been there for 4 hours, motionless. My body temperature was regulated by the thermal gear I hadn't worn since a particularly messy operation in Syria. Through the high-powered scope of my spotting monocular. Not a rifle scope yet. That would be too risky. I watched his life unfold. Victor lived in luxury. A sprawling estate in the Highlands, gated, with private security patrolling the perimeter. 2 guards at the gate, armed. 1 roving patrol with a dog. He was paranoid. Good. Paranoia makes people make mistakes. Inside the house, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, I saw him. He was pouring a drink. Amber liquid, probably scotch older than me. He looked relaxed. He was laughing into a phone, pacing back and forth. He didn't look like a man who had just melted a woman's face off. He looked like a man celebrating a victory. I adjusted the parabolic microphone I had set up on the tripod. It was old tech, but reliable. I plugged the earpiece in and filtered out the sound of the rain. His voice crackled through the static. Handled it perfectly, Grant. Yes, the press is eating the self-defense angle. The husband is a nobody. He's weak. He practically apologized to you? Pathetic. I listened, my face impassive. Weak. Pathetic. Words I had worked very hard to earn. And the girl? Victor asked, pausing to sip his drink. Blind. Good. She can't identify the ledger if she can't see it. Make sure her room is watched. If she talks, sedate her. Use the mental health angle. Post-traumatic hysteria. He laughed again. It was the same laugh from the courtroom. I disconnected the audio feed. I had heard enough. I wasn't going to kill him tonight. Death was too easy. Death was a release. Victor needed to suffer first. He needed to feel the walls closing in. He needed to know what it felt like to be powerless. I climbed down from the roof, moving down the fire escape like smoke. I drove my nondescript van to a secure location, a rented storage unit I had paid for in cash under a fake name 3 years ago. It was my backup, my bug-out contingency. Inside, I had a laptop that wasn't connected to any grid I could be traced to. I cracked my knuckles. Being a boring software engineer wasn't entirely a cover. I really was good with code. But what I did for my day job was building firewalls. What I did for the military was tearing them down. I targeted Victor's digital life. It was harder than I expected. He had military-grade encryption on his private server. That confirmed Amelia's story about the bribes and the ledger. A regular corrupt judge doesn't need that kind of security. He was hiding something massive. I bypassed his home security system's logs first. I looped the camera feeds for the hallway leading to his master bedroom. For the next 10 minutes, the guards watching the monitors would see an empty hallway, regardless of who was walking through it. Then, I drove back to his house. The roving guard was on the east side of the property. The dog, a German shepherd, was alert. I had brought a specialized ultrasonic emitter, a small device that emitted a frequency only dogs could hear, designed to confuse and subdue them without causing permanent harm. I pressed the button as the dog approached the fence. The dog whined, shook its head, and retreated to its kennel, disoriented. I vaulted the fence. 7 feet high, wrought iron. I landed silently on the wet grass. I moved through the shadows of the garden, avoiding the motion sensors I had mapped out earlier. I reached the back door. The lock was a high-end electronic keypad. I connected a brute force decryptor to the panel. It cycled through codes for 12 seconds. Beep. The light turned green. I was inside. The house was warm. It smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. I moved up the stairs, my boots making zero sound on the plush carpet. I reached the master bedroom. The door was ajar. Victor was asleep. He was snoring softly, sprawled out on a king-sized bed, alone. The man who destroyed my wife was sleeping like a baby. I stood over him. I could have ended it right there. A quick snap of the neck. A pillow over the face. He would never know. But that wasn't the mission. I took a picture of him sleeping. Then, I took a single .338 Lapua Magnum bullet from my pocket. It was a sniper round, long and heavy, brass shining in the moonlight. I set it gently on his bedside table, right next to his alarm clock. Next to the bullet, I placed a photo. It wasn't a photo of me. It was a photo of Amelia from before the attack. Beautiful, smiling, eyes bright. I leaned in close to his ear, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. Tick-tock. I whispered, barely a breath. He stirred, grunting, but didn't wake up. I slipped out of the room, down the stairs, and out the back door. I relocked it behind me. By the time I was back in my van, my heart rate was steady at 60 beats per minute. I drove to a 24-hour diner miles away and ordered black coffee. I checked the time. 4 a.m. Victor would wake up in 3 hours. He would see the bullet. He would see the photo. He would check the cameras, and he would see nothing but an empty hallway. He would realize that someone had been in his room, standing over him while he slept, and had chosen to let him live. Fear is a powerful weapon. It makes you sloppy. It makes you doubt your own people. I took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, burnt and bitter. I smiled for the first time in days. The game had started, and Judge Victor just realized he wasn't the only player on the board. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. Adrenaline is a funny thing. When you bottle it up for 7 years, uncorking it feels like a drug. I spent the morning monitoring the police scanners and the encrypted channels I had tapped into the night before. At 7:15 a.m., the call came through. Dispatch, we have a 10 to 52 at the Victor residence. Possible break-in. No sign of forced entry. The homeowner is highly agitated. I leaned back in the driver's seat of my van, listening to the panic in the responding officer's voice. Victor wasn't just agitated. He was terrified. I imagined the scene. Him waking up, reaching for his glasses, and seeing that massive sniper round standing upright like a tombstone next to his head. The photo of Amelia staring back at him. The violation of his sanctuary. He would be screaming at his guards right now, firing people, checking the cameras that showed absolutely nothing. He would know. Deep down, he would know this wasn't a random burglar. This was a message. I switched gears. It was time to visit the hospital. I needed to maintain my cover, and more importantly, I needed Amelia to know she wasn't alone. The hospital room was brighter today. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the bed. Amelia was awake. The bandages around her head were fresh, stark white against her pale skin. Her hands were resting on her stomach, a protective gesture. "Mason?" she asked as soon as I stepped in. Her hearing was already sharpening to compensate for her sight. "It's me," I said, keeping my voice soft, the voice of the worried husband. Did you find a lawyer?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm working on it," I said. "But Grant, the detective, he's blocking everything. They're saying it was an accident." She let out a bitter, choked laugh. "An accident?" He looked me in the eye and laughed. "Mason." He laughed. She gripped the sheets. "He called me this morning." I froze. "Victor called you?" "No. One of his men. A lawyer, I think. He told me that if I testify, if I say anything about the ledger or the baby, that they'll finish the job. He said accidents happen in hospitals all the time." Rage flared in my chest, hot and white, threatening a woman who was already blind, burned, and pregnant. These men had no code. They were animals. "They won't touch you," I promised. "I've hired private security. A friend of a friend. He's outside right now." I hadn't hired anyone. The friend was me, watching from the shadows. But she needed to feel safe. "Mason," she whispered, turning her bandaged face toward me. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I was so stupid. I was lonely, and he made me feel special. He made me feel powerful." "We don't need to talk about that," I said. It was true. I didn't want to hear about her affair. It still hurt, a dull ache behind the anger. But the mission came first. "I need you to tell me exactly where the ledger is," I said. "If we're going to stop him, I need proof." She hesitated. "It's in his office. At the courthouse. Not his chambers, but a private archive room in the basement. Room 402. He keeps it in a safe disguised as a breaker box. The code is his daughter's birthday. April 12th, 09. "Got it," I said, memorizing it instantly. "Mason, don't go there," she pleaded. "He has guards everywhere. He owns the building." "I'm just going to give the info to the FBI, I lied. "I'm not going to do anything stupid." I left the hospital an hour later. I had what I needed. But first, I had to deal with the immediate threat. The lawyer who called her. I traced the number Amelia gave me. It was a burner phone, but the GPS signal pinged to a high-end steakhouse downtown. I drove there. I parked down the street and watched. At noon, a man walked out. Dominic, Amelia's lawyer. The slimeball who had represented her in the divorce hearing. Of course, he was playing both sides. He was working for Victor the whole time, feeding him information, setting Amelia up. I followed him. He drove a silver Porsche, weaving through traffic like he owned the road. He pulled into a multi-level parking garage near his office. I parked 2 levels down and took the stairs, moving fast. Dominic was walking to the elevator, whistling. He was holding his phone, probably checking his bank account for the bonus Victor had just paid him. I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. I was wearing a hoodie and a face mask, standard Seattle attire. "Dominic," I said. He jumped, dropping his keys. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I want you to send a message to your boss." He squinted at me. "Do I know you?" "Look, pal, I don't have any cash." I closed the distance in 2 strides. Before he could scream, I had him pinned against the concrete wall, my forearm pressing against his windpipe. He gagged, his eyes bulging. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered, leaning in close. "You called Amelia Miller this morning. You threatened her." His eyes widened in recognition. You're the husband. "Miller, I'm the guy who's going to peel your life apart if you ever call her again," I said. I pulled a small, wicked-looking knife from my pocket, a karambit. I didn't cut him. I just let the cold steel rest against his cheek. "Judge Victor thinks he's untouchable," I said. "Tell him the bullet on his nightstand was a courtesy. Next time, it won't be on the table. It'll be in his head. He'll kill you." Dominic sputtered, tears leaking from his eyes. "You don't know who he deals with. He sells to cartels, to insurgents. He's not just a judge. And I'm not just a husband," I said. I released him. He slid to the floor, gasping for air. "Deliver the message," I said. "And Dominic?" If you go to the police, I release the photos of you with the underage in turn. Yeah, I found those on your cloud server. Don't test me. I walked away, leaving him shivering on the dirty concrete. I knew he would run straight to Victor. That was the point. I wanted Victor to know I was coming. I wanted him to scramble. I wanted him to make mistakes. Because tonight, I was going into the courthouse. I was going to get that ledger. And I was going to find out exactly what kind of war I had just walked into. I waited until the storm hit. Seattle storms are reliable allies. The wind howls through the city canyons, rattling windows and drowning out the sound of breaking glass. It was 2 a.m. when I parked 3 blocks away from the King County Courthouse. The building was a fortress of stone and glass, imposing and cold. But every fortress has a crack. I had spent the last 6 hours studying the blueprints I pulled from the city archives. The ventilation system on the east wing was undergoing maintenance. The external grates were temporary. I moved through the alleyways, staying in the blind spots of the streetlights. I was wearing full tactical gear now, black combat fatigues, a balaclava, and soft-soled boots. No weapons, not yet. If I got caught, a gun would turn a break-in charge into a terrorism charge. My hands were weapons enough. I scaled the scaffolding on the east side. The wind whipped at my clothes, threatening to pull me off, but I clamped my gloves onto the cold steel pipes and pulled myself up. 3rd floor. 4th floor. There it was. The maintenance vent. I used a pry bar to pop the temporary latches. They gave way with a metallic groan that was instantly swallowed by a clap of thunder. I slid inside and pulled the grate back into place. The air inside the ducts was stale and dusty. I army crawled through the narrow tunnel, counting the turns in my head. Left at the junction. Straight for 20 meters. Dropped down to the basement riser. I reached the basement level. I peered through the slats of the vent. The hallway was empty, lit by flickering fluorescent strips. I unscrewed the vent cover and dropped silently to the floor. Room 402. The archives. I moved down the corridor, checking corners. A security guard was sitting at a desk at the far end, asleep, his feet up on the desk. Complacency kills. I slipped past him like a shadow. The door to room 402 was locked with a standard keypad. I connected my decoder. 10 seconds. Click. I pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room was filled with rows of filing cabinets. It smelled of old paper and bureaucratic decay. I went straight to the breaker box on the back wall. It looked perfectly normal, but when I ran my fingers along the bottom edge, I felt the hidden catch. I pressed it. The front panel swung open, revealing a digital safe. I punched in the code Amelia gave me, April 12th, 09. The lock disengaged with a heavy thud. Inside was a single black leather-bound book and a hard drive. I grabbed them both. I didn't have time to read the book here, but I flipped it open quickly. It wasn't just names and numbers. It was coordinates, shipping manifestos, chemical weapons, grade A narcotics, human trafficking routes. Dominic wasn't lying. Victor wasn't just corrupt. He was a monster operating on a global scale. Suddenly, my earpiece crackled. I had tapped into the building's internal radio frequency. Unit 4 to base. I see an open vent on the east wing. Sending a team to check it out. They found my entry point. I had maybe 3 minutes before they locked down the building. I shoved the ledger and hard drive into my pack. I wasn't going back out the way I came in. That route was burned. I looked at the blueprints in my head. The sewer access. It was in the mechanical room, 2 doors down. I slipped out of the archives. The guard at the desk was awake now, talking into his radio. He turned and saw me. "Hey, stop," he shouted, reaching for his weapon. I didn't stop. I sprinted. He fired. The shot echoed deafeningly in the concrete hallway, chipping the wall next to my head. I reached the mechanical room and kicked the door open. Inside, massive boilers hummed. I found the floor grate for the sewer access. It was heavy, rusted shut. "Freeze," the guard yelled from the doorway. I spun around, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall. I pulled the pin and hurled it at him. It exploded in a cloud of white powder. He coughed, blinded for a second. That second was all I needed. My adrenaline lifted the heavy grate and dropped into the darkness below. I landed in knee-deep water, the smell of sewage hitting me instantly. Above me, I heard more footsteps, shouting. Flashlight beams cut through the steam. He went into the tunnels. Seal the exits. I waded through the muck, moving fast. I knew where this tunnel came out. It dumped into the storm drain system near the waterfront. I emerged an hour later, soaked, filthy, and exhausted. I stripped off my outer gear and burned it in a rusted barrel under a bridge. I made it back to my safe house just as the sun was coming up. I showered, scrubbing the smell of the sewer off my skin until I was raw. Then I sat down with the ledger. I started reading. And as I read, my blood ran cold. One of the entries caught my eye. It was dated 5 years ago. Operation Sandstorm. Coordinates: 34.55, 69.20. Ambush coordinated. Payment received: $2.5 million. I stopped breathing. Operation Sandstorm. That was my unit. That was the mission where we were ambushed. We were pinned down for 3 days. 8 of my men died. My best friend, Kyle, bled out in my arms because evac never came. We were told it was bad intel. We were told it was just bad luck. It wasn't bad luck. It was Victor. He had sold our position. He had sold us. I slammed the book shut. The table shook. This wasn't about Amelia anymore. It wasn't about the acid. It wasn't about the divorce. This was about Kyle. This was about the brothers I buried. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "This line is dead," the voice said. "Not anymore, Oliver," I said. I found the leak. I found the bastard who sold us out in Kabul. There was a long silence on the other end. "Mason?" Oliver asked, his voice changing. "You're supposed to be retired." "I was," I said, looking at the photo of my unit I kept taped to the wall. "But the war just followed me home." "What do you need?" Oliver asked. "I need a cleanup crew for a judge," I said. "And I need authorization to go loud." "If it's a judge, Mason, you're on your own. The agency won't touch domestic targets." "I don't need the agency," I said, watching the sun rise over the city that Victor thought he owned. "I just need you to know why I'm doing it. When the bodies start dropping, don't send the feds after me." "Mason," Oliver warned, "don't start a war you can't finish." "The war is already finished, Oliver," I said, chambering a round into my sniper rifle. "They just don't know they're dead yet." The city woke up like it always did, unaware of the storm brewing beneath its polished surface. I spent the next 2 days planning. Not the chaotic, rage-fueled kind of planning that gets soldiers killed. This was surgical, cold, methodical. Victor had declared himself a king. But kings are only as powerful as the walls around them. I was going to tear down those walls 1 brick at a time. I started with his money. The ledger wasn't just a list of crimes. It was a roadmap to his empire. Bank accounts in the Caymans. Shell corporations in Delaware. Offshore holdings. I fed the information anonymously to 3 investigative journalists who specialized in corruption cases. I made sure the emails were untraceable, routed through servers in 6 different countries. Not mainstream yet, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. King County judge under investigation for financial irregularities. The headlines were vague, but the damage was beginning. While the digital fire spread, I turned my attention to his physical security. Victor had increased his guards after the bedroom incident. For men now, rotating shifts. But more guards meant more communication, and more communication meant more vulnerabilities. I intercepted their radio frequency from my van parked a block away. They were sloppy, undisciplined. Private contractors, not real operators. They complained about the long hours. They talked about what they'd do with the overtime pay. One of them, a guy they called Reeves, mentioned he was having car trouble. His transmission was slipping. He'd have to take it to a mechanic on his day off. Perfect. I followed Reeves the next morning. He drove an old Ford Explorer to a repair shop on the south side. I watched him drop it off and take an Uber home. I waited until the mechanic went to lunch. Then I walked into the garage wearing coveralls and a baseball cap. "Hey," I called to the kid sweeping the floor. Boss asked me to check the Explorer. Transmission job. The kid barely looked up. Bay 3. I walked over to Reeves' car and popped the hood. I didn't sabotage the transmission. That would be too obvious. Instead, I installed a GPS tracker under the rear bumper and cloned his phone using a device I connected to the Bluetooth system in his dashboard. Now I could see everywhere he went. More importantly, I could see everywhere Victor went. That night, I received a notification. Victor was leaving his house. The tracker showed his convoy moving toward downtown. I grabbed my gear and followed at a distance. They stopped at an upscale nightclub called the Sapphire Room. It was one of those exclusive places where politicians and criminals mingled under the guise of charity events. I couldn't get inside. The security at the door was tight, bouncers with earpieces and metal detector wands. But I didn't need to get inside. I needed to send a message. I parked across the street and set up my laptop. The club's Wi-Fi network was password protected, but I cracked it in under 5 minutes. Once inside their network, I accessed the lighting and sound system controls. Victor was on the second floor in a private VIP lounge visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was laughing, surrounded by men in expensive suits. They were toasting, celebrating. I watched him through my monocular. He looked so confident, so untouchable. I waited until the DJ dropped a heavy bass track. Then I triggered the override. The music cut out abruptly. The lights went black. For 3 seconds, the entire club was plunged into silence and darkness. Then, the main screen behind the DJ booth flickered to life. Instead of the club's logo, a single image appeared. It was a photo of Amelia's hospital room. Her bandaged face, the machines surrounding her bed, and below the photo, scrolling text in blood-red letters. Judge Victor melted her face. Ask him what? The crowd gasped. People pulled out their phones, filming. The bouncers rushed toward the control booth, but I had already locked them out remotely. The image stayed on the screen for 10 more seconds before I cut the feed and restored normal operations. By the time the lights came back on, chaos had erupted. People were shouting. Security was scrambling. And Victor, through my monocular, I saw his face. The blood had drained from it. He was screaming into his phone, pointing at the screen. I packed up my gear and drove away before anyone could trace the signal. The damage was done. Videos of the screen were already going viral on social media. Hashtag Judge Victor was trending. The journalists who received the Ledger info earlier were now writing follow-up pieces. The narrative was shifting, but I wasn't satisfied yet. Public humiliation wasn't enough. Victor still had power. He still had connections. He could spin this. He could bury it. I needed to isolate him, cut him off from his support network. The next target was Detective Grant. Grant was the enforcer, the one who made sure Victor's messes got cleaned up. If I removed Grant, Victor would lose his control over the police department. I dug into Grant's life. It didn't take long to find the rot. He had a gambling problem. He owed money to a loan shark named Luca, who operated out of a backroom poker den in Chinatown. I paid Luca a visit, not as Mason the software engineer, as someone who spoke Luca's language. I need a favor, I said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was $10,000 in cash. Luca counted it, his gold rings glinting in the dim light. What kind of favor? Detective Grant. He owes you, right? Luca's eyes narrowed. Yeah, 60 grand. What? Call on the debt. Tonight. Make it public. Loud. I want his department to know he's dirty. Luca grinned. You got a problem with cops? I got a problem with corrupt ones, I said. Done. That night, Luca and 2 of his guys showed up at Grant's house. They didn't hurt him. They didn't have to. They just stood on his lawn, shouting about the money he owed while his neighbors watched and filmed on their phones. By morning, Grant was suspended pending an internal investigation. Victor's walls were crumbling. His media image was shattered. His dirty cop was neutralized. His security detail was compromised. But the man himself was still walking free, still laughing in his mansion, still thinking he could survive this. I returned to my safe house and stared at the tactical map I had pinned to the wall. Photos of Victor, his guards, his properties, lines connecting them like a spider web. I placed a red X over Grant's photo. Then I picked up a marker and drew a circle around Victor's courthouse office. It was time to make him come to me. I picked up my phone and sent an anonymous text to Victor's private number, the one only his inner circle knew. Tomorrow, noon, your chambers. Come alone, or I release everything to the FBI. I knew he wouldn't come alone. Men like Victor never did. He would bring his guards. Maybe even Grant, suspension or not. Good. I wanted them all in one place. Because tomorrow, Judge Victor was going to learn what it felt like to be judged. The courthouse at noon was a beehive of activity. Lawyers hurried through the marble halls, clutching briefcases like life preservers. Tourists took photos of the Grand Dome. Nobody noticed the man in the janitor's uniform pushing a cleaning cart toward the service elevator. Nobody noticed that the man moved with the silent, fluid grace of a predator, not a custodian. I swiped a stolen key card, and the elevator door slid shut. I pressed the button for the top floor. Judge Victor's chambers. I wasn't here to negotiate. The text I sent him was bait. I knew he would surround himself with muscle. I wanted him to think I was walking into a trap, so he wouldn't see the one I had already set. The elevator dinged. I stepped out into the opulent hallway leading to the judge's suite. It was empty. Too empty. Clear. I whispered into my comms, though no one was listening. Old habits die hard. I pushed my cart down the hall. I reached the double oak doors of his chambers. I didn't knock. I didn't burst in. I simply stopped the cart, reached into the bucket of dirty mop water, and pulled out a waterproof Pelican case. Inside was a jamming device. I flipped the switch. Every cell phone, radio, and Wi-Fi signal within 100 feet instantly died. I kicked the door open. The room was exactly as I expected. Victor sat behind his massive desk. Standing around him were 4 armed men, private contractors, not police. And in the corner, looking sweaty and desperate, was Detective Grant. "You've got balls, Miller," Victor said, leaning back in his chair. He didn't look scared. He looked smug. "Walking in here alone? After everything you've done? You really are just a dumb computer guy." The guards raised their weapons. MP5 submachine guns. Serious hardware for a courthouse. "Drop the cleaning supplies," Grant barked, pointing his service pistol at me. "Hands where I can see them." I raised my hand slowly. "I brought the evidence you asked for," I said, nodding toward the cart. "Check it," Victor ordered one of the guards. The guard approached cautiously. He looked into the mop bucket. He looked at the cleaning sprays. Then he looked at the Pelican case I had left on top. "Just some electronic junk, boss," the guard said. "Where is it?" Victor demanded, standing up. "The hard drive. The ledger. Give them to me, and maybe I let you live long enough to say goodbye to your blind wife." "It's not here," I said calmly. "Then why are you here?" Victor sneered. "To beg." "No," I said. "To listen." I reached into my pocket. The guards tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. But I didn't pull a gun. I pulled out a small, black remote. "What is that?" Grant asked, his voice shaking. "Play," I said, and pressed the button. Suddenly, the massive flat-screen TV on Victor's wall flickered to life. It wasn't connected to the Wi-Fi. I had hardwired a transmitter into the building's AV system 3 days ago when I was in the vents. The screen showed a video. But it wasn't the acid attack. It wasn't the affair. It was a grainy, night vision recording from 5 years ago. Afghanistan. A tent in the middle of the desert. 2 men were talking. One was an insurgent leader known as the Butcher. The other man, sitting across from him, counting stacks of American cash, was younger, thinner, but unmistakable. It was Victor. The room went dead silent. What is this?" Grant whispered, lowering his gun slightly. On the screen, Video Victor was speaking. "The coordinates for Bravo Team are Sector 7G. They'll be there at 0400. No air support. They're sitting ducks. You pay me," the Butcher said in broken English. "And they die?" "They die," Video Victor confirmed. smiling as he packed the money into a briefcase. And my contractors get the reconstruction bid for the valley. It's just business. The video ended. The screen went black. In the office, the silence was suffocating. The guards looked at each other. They were mercenaries, sure. They did dirty work. But selling out American soldiers to terrorists? That was a line even paid killers hesitated to cross. That's fake. Victor screamed, his face turning purple. Deep fake. AI. It's not real. It's real, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. I was there. Sector 7G. Bravo team. We waited for air support that never came. 8 men died because you wanted a construction contract. I looked at the guards. He sold us out. He sold Americans out. You really want to die for a traitor? The guards hesitated. Their guns wavered. Shoot him, Victor shrieked, slamming his fist on the desk. I pay you. Kill him, boss. One of the guards said, lowering his weapon. My brother served in Kandahar. If this is real, it's a lie, Victor roared. He grabbed a heavy brass statue from his desk and hurled it at the TV, shattering the screen. Then, he did something desperate. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a gold-plated revolver. If you won't do it, I will. He leveled the gun at me. But before he could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out. It wasn't Victor. It wasn't me. It was Grant. The corrupt detective stood there, smoke curling from his barrel. But he hadn't shot me. He hadn't shot Victor either. He had shot the guard who was lowering his weapon. The man dropped instantly. I'm in too deep. Grant yelled, his eyes wild. If he goes down, I go down. Kill the husband. Kill him now. Chaos erupted. The remaining 3 guards, panicked by the sudden violence, started firing. Bullets tore through the room, shredding the leather chairs, shattering the windows. I dove behind the heavy oak cleaning cart just as the wood splintered under a hail of gunfire. I was unarmed, trapped, pinned down by 3 mercenaries and a desperate cop. Frag out, one of the guards yelled. I saw a small, round object rolling across the carpet toward me. A flashbang. I kicked the cart forward with all my strength, sending it crashing into the guards just as the grenade detonated. Boom. The room turned white. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine. Disoriented, I scrambled toward the window. We were on the top floor. No escape. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Victor laughing. That same sick laugh. You thought you could beat me with a video? He screamed. I own this city. I own the truth. I felt a hand grab my ankle. Grant dragged me out from behind the cart, putting his gun to my head. End of the road, hero, he spat. I looked at Victor. He was smiling, safe behind his desk. Goodbye, Mr. Miller, Victor said. But then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A single buzz. The signal. I looked Grant in the eye. Duck. What? Crash. The window behind Victor exploded inward. Not from a bullet. From a body. A figure in black tactical gear swung through the shattered glass on a rappel line. Boots slamming into Victor's chest and sending him flying into the wall. 2 more figures smashed through the other windows. Red laser sights cut through the smoke. Federal agents. Drop your weapons. It wasn't the FBI. It wasn't the police. The lead figure stood up, leveling a suppressed assault rifle at Grant. He lifted his visor. It was Oliver, my old handler. And behind him were 4 men wearing patches I hadn't seen in 7 years. My old unit. The ghosts of the men Victor thought he had buried. Sorry we're late, Mason, Oliver said, a grim smile on his face. Traffic was a bitch. Victor groaned on the floor, looking up at the team of black ops operators surrounding him. Who are you? He wheezed. I stood up, wiping blood from my lip. I walked over to him and looked down. We're the bad luck you didn't account for, I said. And then, the world turned upside down. Grant dropped his gun. The mercenaries surrendered. It looked like a victory. But as Oliver moved to cuff Victor, the judge started laughing again. A wheezing, bloody cough of a laugh. You think this is over? Victor whispered, looking at me with eyes full of madness. You think I kept the leverage here? I have a dead man switch, Miller. If I don't check in every 12 hours, a file goes out. He grinned, blood staining his teeth. Not to the press. To the cartel. The ones who supplied the acid. He leaned closer. They know where your wife is. Right now. My blood froze. Hospital, I gasped. Checkmate, Victor whispered. The world narrowed down to a single terrifying thought. Amelia. Victor's laugh echoed in the shattered office, a sound of pure, concentrated malice. He was handcuffed, bleeding, surrounded by the most elite soldiers on earth, and yet he held the high ground. He knew it. Oliver, I need a chopper. I barked, already moving toward the door. Now, Oliver didn't ask questions. He tapped his comms. Shadow 1 to Overwatch. We need immediate extract. Priority Alpha. Destination, St. Mary's Hospital. Go. You won't make it. Victor taunted from the floor as two of my old teammates hauled him up. The cartel doesn't like loose ends. And they really don't like witnesses who can identify their chemical signatures. I didn't stop to hit him. He wasn't worth the time. Every second I wasted on him was a second Amelia didn't have. I sprinted to the roof. The wind was whipping violently now, the storm intensifying. Through the gray curtain of rain, I saw the black shape of a little bird helicopter rising from the nearby helipad where Oliver's team had staged. I jumped into the open bay before the skids even touched the roof. Go, go, go. The pilot banked hard, the G-force pressing me into the seat. Below us, the city was a blur of gray and wet concrete. Talk to me, Mason, Oliver said over the headset. What's the threat? Cartel hit squad, I said, checking the loadout on the rifle Oliver had tossed me. And 416 Hong Kong dollars. Familiar. Lethal. Victor has a dead man switch. He didn't check in. They're moving on Amelia to silence her. ETA 2 minutes, the pilot called out. 2 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. I pulled up the hospital's security feed on my wrist tablet. I had hacked it days ago. The screen flickered. Static. They cut the feed, I said, my stomach dropping. They're already inside. The helicopter swooped low over the hospital. It was a chaotic scene. Police cars were surrounding the entrance, lights flashing, but they were holding back. They didn't know what was happening inside. Roof drop, I ordered. Put me on top. It's a hot LZ. Mason, the pilot warned. Snipers on the south tower. A bullet pinged off the fuselage near my head. I didn't flinch. Just get me close. The chopper flared, hovering 10 feet above the hospital roof. I unclipped my safety harness and jumped. I hit the gravel roof, rolling to absorb the impact, and came up with the rifle shouldered. I sprinted for the roof access door. Locked. I fired 2 rounds into the mechanism and kicked it open. I was in the stairwell. Top floor. Amelia was on the 4th floor. I took the stairs 3 at a time, sliding down the railings. 4th floor. I burst through the door into the hallway. It was a war zone. 2 hospital security guards were down, zip-tied, and unconscious. A nurse was cowering behind a desk, sobbing. Down the hall, outside Amelia's room, stood 2 men. They wore tactical vests over civilian clothes. Sicarios. They were setting up a breach charge on her door. They saw me. They raised their weapons. AK-47s, short barrels. I didn't slow down. I fired while moving. Pop, pop. Pop, pop. Double taps. Center mass. The first man dropped before he could pull the trigger. The second man sprayed a burst of fire that chewed up the wall next to me, plaster exploding like chalk dust. I dove into a patient room, sliding across the polished floor. I waited 1 second. 2. He was moving toward me. I could hear his boots crunching on the broken plaster. I pulled the pin on a flashbang Oliver had given me and rolled it into the hall. Bang. A scream. I swung out. The Sicario was stumbling, hands to his eyes. 1 shot to the shoulder, 1 to the leg. He went down, alive but neutralized. I ran to Amelia's room. The door was still locked. I tried the handle. Jammed from the inside. Amelia, I shouted. It's Mason. Open the door. Mason. Her voice was hysterical, coming from the other side. There's someone on the balcony. He has a knife. My blood turned to ice. The balcony. I kicked the door. It didn't budge. Reinforced hospital safety doors. I stepped back and fired at the hinges. Blam! Blam! I kicked it again. The door flew open. I rushed in. The room was a wreck. The bed was overturned. Amelia was backed into the corner, holding a shards of a broken vase, swinging it blindly in front of her. And coming through the sliding glass door from the balcony was a third man. Huge. Tattoos climbing up his neck. He held a combat knife, and he was smiling. He lunged at her. No. I warred. I didn't have a clean shot. Amelia was in the line of fire. I dropped the rifle and tackled him. We hit the floor hard. He was strong, smelling of sweat and tobacco. He slashed at me, the knife catching my forearm, slicing through the tactical fabric and into skin. I ignored the pain. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently. Bones snapped. He grunted, but didn't drop the knife. He headbutted me, splitting my lip. I saw stars. He was on top of me now, the knife inching toward my throat. Amelia, get down, I yelled. Suddenly, the man jerked. His eyes went wide. He slumped forward onto me, dead weight. I pushed him off, gasping for air. Standing behind him was Amelia. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face under the bandages. In her hand was a scalpel she must have grabbed from the medical tray. She had plunged it into his neck. She couldn't see, but she had hurt him. She had fought back. Mason, she sobbed, dropping the scalpel. Is he? It's over, I said, scrambling to her. I wrapped my arms around her. She was trembling so hard it felt like she was vibrating. I've got you. I've got you. My comms crackled. Mason's status? It was Oliver. Secure, I panted. Targets neutralized. Amelia is safe. But get a medic up here. I'm bleeding. We walked out of the hospital 10 minutes later. The police had finally moved in, securing the perimeter. Paramedics treated my arm. Amelia held my hand, refusing to let go. But the war wasn't over. Victor was in custody, yes. But he had humiliated me. He had hurt her. And he was still breathing. That night, the news broke. But it wasn't the story Victor expected. My team, Oliver's team, hadn't just arrested him. They had seized his servers. And while I was fighting in the hospital, they had uploaded everything. Every bribe. Every sold coordinate. Every text message mocking the victims. I sat in the safe house, watching the TV. Amelia was sleeping in the next room, under guard. On the screen, Victor was being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. But the crowd wasn't cheering. They were silent. Then, someone threw a tomato. Then a rock. Then, the audio played. The hackers, my friends, had hijacked the giant digital billboards in Times Square, in Piccadilly Circus, in Shibuya Crossing. And all over the world, millions of people heard Judge Victor's voice, clear as day. She's blind? Good. She can't identify the ledger if she can't see it. And then, the video of him laughing in court. It played on a loop. Victor looked up at the screens as the marshals shoved him into the van. For the first time, the arrogance was gone. He looked small. He looked terrified. He wasn't just a criminal anymore. He was the most hated man in America. I watched him disappear into the van. That's for the eyes, I whispered. But there was one piece left. The cartel. The ones who sent the hit squad. They wouldn't stop just because Victor was in jail. They would want revenge for their men. I looked at my phone. A message from Oliver. We found the supplier. The one who sold the acid. He's in Mexico. We have a green light. I stood up. My arm throbbed, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I wasn't a husband anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was the ghost. And I had one last trip to make. Leaving Amelia again felt worse than any bullet wound. She sat upright in the hospital bed this time. Bandages smaller, skin still raw but healing. The machines were quieter. She looked fragile and strong at the same time. Fingers tracing the edge of the blanket, like she was memorizing the texture of the world she could no longer see. "You're really going?" she asked, turning her head toward the sound of my boots. "Yeah," I said. "Just for a few days." "You said that when you deployed the last time," she whispered, a sad half-smile on her lips. You came back a different man. I don't have much of a choice, I replied. The guy who sold Victor that acid? He's still out there. As long as he's breathing, there's always another bottle, another courtroom, another Amelia. She swallowed hard. You keep saying justice, Mason. But I know that tone in your voice. It's the same tone Victor had right before he threw it. That hit harder than she meant it to. I'm not him, I said quietly. I know, she said, reaching out. Her hand fumbled in the air until I stepped closer and let her find my arm. Her fingers curled around my bicep. But I also know what you're capable of. I didn't ask enough questions when we got married, because I liked the version of you who pretended to be normal. Maybe that's on me. It's on both of us, I admitted. For a moment, the room was just for beeps and distant hallway voices. I was pregnant, she said suddenly, voice shaking. They lost the baby during surgery. It was Victor's. You deserve to hate me for that. The words landed like shrapnel. There it was, spoken plainly. No anesthesia. I already grieved that, I said. Not the baby. The idea of us. That died a long time ago. She started to cry, quietly, shoulders trembling. Why are you still here then? Why are you doing all this? She asked. You could have walked away. Let me rot with my choices. I thought about answering with something noble. I didn't. Because somewhere between the cheating and the court and the acid, I said slowly, you stopped being my unfaithful wife and became someone hurt by the same monster that hurt my men. And I know what it's like to have no one show up. Her grip tightened. I don't deserve you, she whispered. We're way past deserving, I said. We're just surviving now. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to her bandaged forehead. It wasn't romantic. It was a goodbye between two people who had seen each other at their absolute worst. Try to rest, I said. Oliver's team will have a man outside your door around the clock. No more surprises. Come back alive, Mason, she murmured. Not for me. For you. I left without answering. Mexico was hot in the way that seeps into your bones. Dry, shimmering heat that made the air over the highway look like boiling water. The safe house was a concrete box on the edge of an industrial town. Chemical plants, shipping yards, rusted trucks. Oliver stood over a table covered in satellite photos and floor plans. Our guy is named Tristan Herrera, he said, tapping a grainy image of a man in a lab coat stepping out of a warehouse. Former chemist for a pharmaceutical company. Now he cooks compounds for whoever pays the most. Victor was one of his favorite customers. Security? I asked. 8 to 10 men. Light weapons. Factory is front-owned by a cleaning supplies exporter. Acid shipments leave twice a week in tanker trucks. I studied the photos. Lines, fields of fire, angles. We go in, grab Tristan, hand him to the Mexicans with the ledger pages that tie him to Victor, I said. They flip him for the cartel hierarchy. Everyone wins. And you get to sleep a little easier, Oliver added, reading my face. Something like that, I said. Night fell. We moved. No helicopters this time. No dramatic entrances. Just 2 trucks, headlights off, rolling up a dirt service road behind the plant. Crickets screamed in the nearby fields. The building loomed over us. Concrete, corrugated metal, stacks spewing steam. Shadow team in position. Came a low voice over the comms. Eyes on 3 tangos at the loading dock, 2 at the main door. Copy, Oliver said. Non-lethal if we can. We want the chemist and his data, not a body count. I almost smiled. Quiet revenge. Even here, the rule held. We slipped through a side gate, hugging the shadow of a storage silo. I could smell the sharp tang of chemicals, the sour rot of standing water. We were 10 yards from the side entrance when Oliver's radio crackled in a different tone. A secure channel. He froze, listening. Say again, he said. A muffled voice spoke rapidly in his earpiece, too low for me to catch. Oliver's jaw tightened. You're kidding me, he muttered. Under whose authority? More words. Then static. He looked at me. There was something in his eyes I didn't like. Orders just changed, he said. From who? I asked. Langley. DC DOJ. Take your pick, he said. Tristan Herrera is now an asset, not a target. We're to stand down, pull back, and let a joint task force handle it next month. No arrests. No contact. I stared at him. Victor bought his acid from this guy. Cartel contracts run through this plant. And we're supposed to just walk away. Apparently Victor's lawyer is already negotiating a plea deal. Oliver said bitterly. He gives up names, routes, Herrera's operation, in exchange for avoiding the needle. It took a second for that to sink in. They're going to deal with him, I said. After everything he did. After what he did to my unit. To Amelia. They want the network more than they want the man. Oliver replied. We've seen this play before, Mason. Ugly math, but that's how they play it. Something went cold inside me. That video in his office, the ledger, I started. Helps the case, Oliver cut in. Hurts the optics if a rogue sniper is running around committing international kidnapping on the side. They also know about your little courthouse stunt. The nightclub hack. Grant's suspension. He hesitated. They're asking questions about you. There it was. The second blade. How do they know? I asked quietly. Oliver didn't answer right away. The silence was enough. You reported me, I said. I covered you as long as I could, he shot back. But once Victor's lawyers started screaming vigilante, DC came sniffing. Those journalists you fed, they're already hinting there was off-the-books help. They connect the right dots. This whole thing collapses. They needed a clean story. Brave agencies catch corrupt judge. Not. Broken sniper goes on vendetta. And what am I in that story? I asked. My voice sounded calm. I wasn't. He held my gaze. Best case? An unstable witness they can discredit. Worst case? A scapegoat. You, Grant, Victor, tie it up in one messy bow. System failed. System corrected itself. We stood in the Mexican dirt, the plant humming obliviously behind us, while my own country decided what box to put me in. So now what? I asked. We just get back on the plane and pretend we didn't spend the last week tearing this man's life apart? Oliver sighed, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Officially? We pack up. Unofficially, he lowered his voice. You need to disappear, Mason. Today. Before marshals or FBI get an arrest warrant with your name on it. The hunter becomes the hunted, I said, bitter irony twisting in my gut. This is bigger than you or me, Oliver said. You lit the match. The fire's spreading. Let it burn the way it's going to burn. If you stay in it, they'll use you as firewood. I looked back at the plant, at the orange glow in the high windows, at the idea of Tristan walking free for another month, another year, making more acid for more victors. Every instinct screamed to finish what I started. But then I saw Amelia in that hospital room, hands shaking, swinging blind at a man with a knife. I saw my men in that grainy video, ghosts who never got this choice. And I saw Victor, smirking even in cuffs, trusting the system he'd corrupted to cut him the best deal. Quiet revenge. Through exposure. Through truth. Through the one thing he could never fully control, how people felt about him. Get me back to Seattle, I said finally. If I'm going to be hunted, I want to choose the ground. Oliver nodded, relief and regret mixing in his eyes. We'll get you 24 hours of grace before anyone knows you're stateside. After that, you're on your own. On the flight back, staring at the dark curve of the earth outside the window, the plan shifted in my head. I couldn't kill Victor. Not anymore. That wouldn't be justice. It would just be cleanup. But there was one thing I could still do better than anyone on this planet. I could make one last shot count. Not to end a life. To end a lie. Seattle was gray, just like the day this all started. But this wasn't the quiet gray of a Tuesday morning. It was the tense, electric gray of a city waiting for an explosion. I had been back for 12 hours. Oliver had kept his word. My name hadn't hit the news wires as a suspect yet. But I knew the clock was ticking. The rogue sniper narrative was being typed up in some DHS basement right now. I stood on the rooftop of a decommissioned textile factory in Soto. It was an old haunt, a place where I used to come to think when the nightmares got too loud. From here, You had a clear line of sight across the industrial district, over the water, and straight toward the federal detention center where Victor was being held. Correction, where he was being transferred from. According to the encrypted chatter Oliver had accidentally left on my tablet before we parted ways, Victor was being moved today. A secure transport to a federal courthouse for a preliminary hearing on his plea deal. A plea deal. Those words tasted like ash. He was going to trade names, serve 10 years in a minimum security camp, and write a memoir. He would still be rich. He would still be arrogant. He would still be alive. I checked the wind speed. 8 miles per hour, coming off the sound. Distance, 1,850 yards. Just over a mile. My rifle, the Chaitak M200, rested on its bipod. I wasn't using standard ammunition. I had loaded a single, custom-made round. It wasn't designed to penetrate armor. It wasn't designed to kill. It was designed to shatter. Through my scope, I watched the gates of the detention center open. A convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled out. Victor would be in the middle one. Armored plating. Bulletproof glass rated to stop a .50 caliber round. He felt safe. He felt like he had won. I adjusted my scope for the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth during the bullet's flight time. At this distance, the world literally moved beneath the bullet before it landed. I dialed in the elevation. I controlled my breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Pause. The convoy turned onto the main highway bridge. For about 4 seconds, they would be perfectly perpendicular to my position. I wasn't aiming for the driver. I wasn't aiming for the engine block. I was aiming for something much smaller. Victor sat in the back seat, handcuffed but relaxed. I could imagine him smirking at his lawyers, maybe making a joke about the food. I saw the glint of the sun on the SUV's window. For the eyes, I whispered. I squeezed the trigger. The recoil punched my shoulder, a familiar, violent kiss. The suppressor coughed, sending a burst of gas into the damp air. I stayed on the scope. Flight time was nearly 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Impact. The bullet didn't punch through the glass. It hit the reinforced window exactly 2 inches from where Victor's head would be resting against the headrest. But this wasn't a normal bullet. It was a frangible round with a hardened steel core designed to transfer maximum kinetic energy upon impact without penetration. The entire window spiderwebbed instantly, turning opaque white. The shockwave rattled the entire vehicle. The driver panicked. He swerved. The SUV fishtailed, slamming into the concrete barrier of the bridge. It didn't flip, but it ground to a screeching, violent halt. Smoke poured from the tires. The other SUVs screeched to a stop, agents jumping out, weapons drawn, scanning for a threat they couldn't see. Inside the car, Victor would be deafened, shaken, terrified, but he was alive. I watched through the scope as the back door opened. Agents dragged him out. He was stumbling, clutching his chest. He looked up at the sky, at the buildings, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated fear. He realized then what I wanted him to realize. I could have killed him. I could have put that bullet through the door seal, through the roof, through his eye. I chose not to. I chose to break his shield instead. He wasn't safe. Not in a convoy. Not in a cell. Not in a courtroom. I stood up and disassembled the rifle in under 30 seconds. I wiped every piece down. I left the casing on the roof ledge. But before I left, I pulled out a small burner phone. I dialed the number for the lead prosecutor on Victor's case, a woman named Kendra who had been quoted in the papers saying she wanted justice, not vengeance. She answered on the second ring. "Who is this?" "Check your email in 5 minutes," I said. "You're about to get a file named Project Sandstorm." "What? Is this Miller?" "The plea deal is off the table," I said. "Victor didn't just sell acid. He sold state secrets. He sold troops. If you give him a deal, you're an accessory to treason. Mr. Miller, you need to turn yourself in. We have reports of a shot fired. I missed. I lied. On purpose. Next time, I won't." I hung up and crushed the phone under my boot. I walked to the edge of the roof and looked down at the chaos on the bridge. Sirens wailed. A news helicopter was already circling. Victor was on his knees on the asphalt, surrounded by agents, weeping. The invincible judge, the king of Seattle, reduced to a shivering mess on the side of the road. I had taken his power. I had taken his peace. Now, I had to disappear. I went down the fire escape to my waiting car. I had a bag packed, a new passport, a new name, but I had one last stop. I drove to the hospital. I didn't go inside. Too risky. I parked across the street. I could see Amelia's window on the 4th floor. The blinds were open. She was sitting in a chair by the window, face turned toward the faint warmth of the sun coming through the glass. She looked peaceful. Sad, but peaceful. I took out my real phone. I typed a text message. He's alive, but he's finished. You're safe. I hit send. I watched her pick up her phone. She held it close, using the accessibility voice-to-text feature. She listened. I saw her shoulders drop. She leaned her head against the window. Then she typed something back. My phone buzzed. I know it was you. Thank you. Goodbye, Mason. I looked at the message for a long time. Goodbye, Amelia. I whispered. I put the car in gear. The radio was already buzzing with the news. Attempted assassination on Judge Victor. Convoy attacked. Suspect at large. They would never find the shooter. The ghost was already gone. I drove toward the highway, merging into the stream of traffic. Just another car. Just another face. The software engineer was dead. The husband was dead. The soldier was retired. I didn't know who I was anymore. But as I drove past the city limits, watching the skyline fade in the rearview mirror, I realized something. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't have to pretend. I was free. 6 months later. They say time heals all wounds, but that's a lie. Time just builds scar tissue. It covers the damage, makes it tougher, but the nerve endings underneath never really stop firing. I was living in a small coastal town in Oregon now. I went by the name Evan. I worked at a boat repair shop, fixing diesel engines. It was loud, dirty work. I liked it. The grease stained my hands, hiding the calluses from the rifle. Nobody here knew I was Mason Miller. Nobody knew I was a ghost. Every morning, I bought a newspaper. And every morning, for months, I followed the trial. The impossible shot on the bridge had changed everything. It terrified the prosecutors. It terrified the defense. But mostly, it terrified Victor. He became paranoid, convinced that the sniper was still out there, waiting for him to step outside. He refused bail. He refused to leave his cell. He practically begged to be kept in solitary confinement for his own protection. And then, the evidence I sent to Kendra, the prosecutor, dropped. The treason charges stuck. It wasn't just corruption anymore. It was espionage. The media frenzy was relentless. The acid judge became the traitor judge. His assets were frozen. His mansion was seized. His reputation wasn't just destroyed, it was vaporized. Today was the sentencing. I sat on a driftwood log on the beach, the gray ocean churning in front of me. I pulled up the live stream on my phone. The courtroom was packed. Victor sat at the defense table. He looked unrecognizable. He had lost 50 pounds. His hair was thinning and white. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung off his frame. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't looking at anyone with contempt. He was staring at the floor, defeated. Judge Victor, the presiding judge said, a stern woman who looked at him with pure disgust. You have been found guilty on all counts. Treason, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, aggravated assault. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle. You used the law as a weapon. You used your power to destroy lives. You sold out your country for profit. Victor didn't move. For your crimes, I sentence you to life in a federal supermax facility, without the possibility of parole. You will be stripped of your pension, your titles, and your citizenship rights. You will die in prison, Mr. Victor. The gavel came down. Bang. It was a sharp, final sound. The sound of a door closing forever. Victor flinched. He looked up, just for a second, directly into the news camera. His eyes were hollow. He looked like a man who was already dead. I turned off the phone. It was over. He wouldn't get the easy way out. He wouldn't get a bullet. He would get decades of silence. He would get concrete walls and steel bars. He would rot, slowly, knowing that the man he called weak was out here, free, breathing the salt air. I stood up and walked down the beach. I thought about Amelia. The last I heard, she had moved to Montana to live with her sister. She was learning to navigate the world without sight. She had started painting again, using texture and raised lines. It was messy, abstract, and beautiful. She sent me a letter a month ago. It had no return address. Mason, it read in shaky, braille-stamped handwriting. I don't see the dark anymore. I see the second chance you gave me. I hope you find yours. I kept the letter in my wallet. I wasn't sure if I believed in second chances, but I believed in this. I had walked through the fire, and I hadn't burned up. I stopped by the water's edge. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light on the waves. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like freedom. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a villain. I was just a man who had done what was necessary. I picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. It sank on the 5th. Tick-tock. I whispered to the ocean. Time's up. I turned my back on the water and walked toward the town, toward the shop, toward Evan. Mason Miller was gone, but his story was finally finished. This story was a journey of betrayal, pain, and the kind of justice that doesn't just punish, it restores balance. So, I have to ask you, do you think Mason made the right choice by letting Victor rot in prison instead of taking the final shot? Or does a monster like that deserve a quicker end? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments. And hey, if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me bring more of these dark, emotional thrillers to life for you. Also, I want to write what you want to hear. Tell me in the comments, what kind of stories do you want next? More military revenge? Family secrets? Underdog justice? Let me know, and I'll craft the next epic saga just for you. Until then, stay safe, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next story.